with the beginning of the end of obesity stigma.
Everyone in Hollywood still seems to be talking about is Ozempic.
Our children look like sumo wrestlers.
That's why we created Weight Loss by Hims.
But I think I'm gonna take both of them tonight.
I think it's a good idea. You don't just have to...
But what do people know and think about them?
Is Ozempic right for me?
Is something wrong, Randy?
No!
And beyond is the end of obesity as we know it. It's a bold statement, right? It's a bold statement. It's a little bit of a change of tact on what everyone has spoken about. But every few decades, medicine comes along that upends the pharmaceutical industry and society at large. We had penicillin in the 40s, we had Prozac in the 80s, in the 90s we had statins, and of course the immuno-oncology drugs of the last decade. And I think there's a very good...
Glucagon-like peptide-1 is a protein secreted in the upper intestinal tract in the presence of food. It travels the bloodstream to destinations throughout the body. When it reaches the pancreas, GLP-1 binds to the GLP-1 receptor, a protein embedded in cellular membranes. This causes an increase in insulin release. Insulin is also a protein. It's produced in the pancreas and released into the blood when blood sugar increases after eating. In the blood, insulin travels throughout the body, priming cells to absorb glucose for energy. Insulin oversees the transition from ingested food to cellular fuel. Like all bodily processes, blood sugar regulation is a homeostatic balance. If blood sugar is too high, it can damage cells in the long term. If too low, then our cells stop working. Diabetes is the result of malfunctioning insulin. In type 1 diabetes, the body doesn't produce any insulin. In type 2, insulin doesn't work well and blood sugar runs high. Type 2 doesn't automatically require insulin since the body still makes some, but it may if blood sugar remains too high for too long. In 1982, we already had synthetic insulin for diabetes treatment. So why was one researcher poking around the pancreas of the deep-sea anglerfish in pursuit of GLP-1? Well, he wasn't exactly. In 1982, we didn't know GLP-1 existed. But once more research stemming from this fish yielded more insight into the newly discovered GLP-1 and its role in the body, scientists realized its potential as a treatment for diabetes. When we inject insulin, it gets to work immediately, lowering blood sugar by signaling cellular uptake. For this reason, we often time insulin with meals, helping our body normalize the rise in blood sugar after eating. However, insulin can also cause low blood sugar and weight gain. GLP-1, on the other hand, can only increase insulin secretion when blood sugar levels are high enough. It's buffered from the possible hypoglycemic effects of injectable insulin. This blood sugar lowering effect of GLP-1 only works if the body makes its own insulin, meaning it can't be used as a treatment for type 1 diabetes. But for the large and growing population of people with type 2 diabetes who have functioning insulin-secreting cells remaining, GLP-1 as a drug promised a new avenue for treatment. By 1987, we had strong evidence that GLP-1 and the GLP-1 receptor would be good targets for drug development. There was a problem though. GLP-1 doesn't last long. If we started with this amount of GLP-1 at the beginning of the video, we'd have about this much left. Before we were even a decade in, GLP-1 as a drug was a dead end. All right, I'd like to thank my patrons, Cam, Spencer, Hannah, Mom, Dad, Small Town Jimmy, Taylor, Ishwar, Big Sis, Italiana, Gila Monster 409, Tom, Jerry, that bulldog's name I can't remember, Scooby, Doobie2, Do. Wait a second, I don't have a patron named Hirama. In the land of excess and disparity, it's fitting that the only venomous lizard in the US makes a living binge feeding in the deserts of the Southwest. 3 to 4 extensive meals seem to last this lizard a full year. But that's not why they've become America's sweetheart. From their venomous saliva sprung forth the first injectable GLP-1 receptor agonist, which we'll get to in a minute. Around the same time, scientists in Boston were studying anglerfish. Another lab, this time in Brooklyn, was studying a protein found in the Gila monster's venom. A protein that not only looked like GLP-1, but also bound to its receptor. A protein with a half-life of about 2.5 hours instead of 2.5 minutes. A protein that would come to be known as Exendin-4. Exenatide in 2005 was followed by liraglutide in 2010, These were followed by the first weekly GLP-1 receptor agonist, an extended-release version of exenatide. Albiglutide and dulaglutide came to market in 2014, and in 2016 we got lixisenatide. And then in 2017 we got the real Danish hero semaglutide, more popularly known as. But Ozempic isn't the reason we're all talking about GLP-1 today. Ozempic is only FDA approved to treat type 2 diabetes. Despite the high certainty that diabetes can lead to long-term negative health outcomes, Ozempic became a household name due to one of the side effects of GLP-1 therapy: weight loss. GLP-1 is multifunctional. Its effects that I spoke of before are it interacting with cellular receptors on the beta cells of the pancreas. But there are also GLP-1 receptors on neurons controlling the stomach and intestines, which slows the emptying of food, and on neurons in the brain, which regulate appetite and feelings of fullness. So not only does GLP-1 help control blood sugar by stimulating insulin secretion, it also indirectly helps control it via signals to our brain telling us we're full. Because relatively safe and effective weight loss drugs are few and far between, the GLP-1s plugged a hole in society's desire for thinness. And with the American Medical Association declaring obesity a disease in 2013, as well as ongoing fears about an obesity epidemic, the GLP-1s, for the drug company's sake, couldn't have come along at a better time. Obesity's status as a disease alongside others like diabetes is hazy, while the stigma that fat people face and the negative effect on their health is clear. We fall on BMI as the arbiter for obesity, despite its inability to give us data on percent body fat, fat type, fat location, or to discern differences in fat accumulation between ethnic groups. Diabetes, on the other hand, has more objective measures that better predict the functional status of insulin in our body. While there are negative health outcomes associated with obesity, it's difficult to determine whether obesity, a term already difficult to agree on since it's faultily based on BMI, is the cause, or if a factor like stress from stigmatization may be preceding it. Strictly looking at mortality data, BMI and excess mortality seem to be associated along a J-curve, with mortality the lowest along a BMI of 24 to 28, despite its overlap with both the normal and overweight categories. Meanwhile, medical schools and organizations the world over agree that weight-based stigma and internalized weight bias can be particularly harmful to mental health. This is supported by a nationally representative survey conducted in the US from 2001 to 2005 of 22,000 adults with a BMI greater than 25. Adults who reported some form of weight discrimination during the first survey period were more likely to experience a negative mental health outcome 2 years later. And this was independent of BMI, meaning an increase in BMI didn't increase the likelihood of a correlation. Adults and children who experience weight-based stigma are more likely to avoid exercise and physical activity, and to engage in unhealthy diets and sedentary behaviors that increase the risk of worsening obesity. In an interesting social experiment from 2014, 91 college women were directed to read either an article titled "Lose Weight" or "Lose Your Job," or "Quit Smoking" or "Lose Your Job." They were then told to explain the article and its rationale before they were led to a waiting room with pre-weighed bowls of snacks. For the 44 participants who did not perceive themselves as overweight, caloric consumption did not differ between those who read the two articles. But for the 49 participants who perceived themselves as overweight, those who read the article on losing weight consumed about 80 more calories than those who read the smoking article, suggesting that, at least for young adult women who believe themselves to be overweight, weight stigmatization may increase caloric consumption as a response to the associated stress. Quality of healthcare is adversely affected by weight-based stigma. This is supported by data from Harvard's Project Implicit, which measures survey respondents' attitudes and beliefs for various socially stigmatized classes. Project Implicit is actually an interesting survey, and if you haven't, I recommend checking it out. The goal of the multiple surveys is to measure preferences that people may be unwilling or unable to report. But how could someone be unable to report their own preferences? Well, beliefs may be held unconsciously. I don't think many of us would report that we hold negative attitudes towards different social classes, but Data from this survey, as well as the experience of people from these stigmatized classes, suggests that these beliefs are more common than we may realize. As the project explains, the IAT measures the strength of associations between concepts, for example, Black people, gay people, and evaluations, good, bad, or stereotypes, athletic, clumsy. The main idea is that making a response is easier when closely related items share the same response key. For instance, the weight test can show if someone associates a person with certain evaluative norms, such as unprofessional or incompetent, based solely on that person's silhouette. Based on data collected from hundreds of thousands of survey takers, the study found that implicit anti-fat bias is as pervasive among doctors as it is among the general public. And unlike the other stigmatized classes, a study by Sabine et al. Using this data showed that explicit anti-fat bias, the communication of these beliefs to the outside world, was just as strong as the implicit bias, those unconsciously held beliefs. Other statements supported by this international consensus include fear of prejudice may cause some people classified as obese to avoid medical care. Public health campaigns that embrace stigmatization as a method of promoting health aren't supported by scientific evidence and may yield the opposite effect.
I think they're being overutilized and unfortunately creating maybe even a lazier society because people aren't necessarily changing their diets or increasing their exercise habits.
The assumption that diet and exercise alone can reverse obesity over long periods of time is not supported by science. This is partly because biological mechanisms resist changes in weight through processes such as increased appetite and decreased metabolic rate. This leads to weight regain in the long term. But still, is it possible GLP-1s will be
the end of obesity as we know it?
Let's say we have a person who's 5'10" and 300 pounds. Their BMI would be 43. If this person goes on a GLP-1 and loses 30% of their body weight, 10% more than the highest average weight loss of a GLP-1 currently, then that person would weigh 210 pounds and have a BMI of 30.1, still classified as obese despite losing 90 pounds. The problem with speculating about an end to obesity is that it sidesteps a more important discussion. Why are we so afraid of fat? We say we're concerned with people's health, but then we show footage of fat bodies detached from their personhood, amidst ominous warnings of an impending health crisis. We shame individual lifestyles without genuinely addressing societal structures that benefit from our poor health, whether we be fat, straight-sized, or thin. We use health as an excuse to judge another person's body, separating a them from an us by what we believe to be a healthier lifestyle.
But where are we in society when we're all about body positivity? And if you weigh 600 pounds, you're supposed to be a hero for flying in a coach seat and taking up 3 seats and making other people uncomfortable.
Instead of general well-being, health becomes a virtue. We lean into the cultivation of health and overlook our environments because we don't want to believe our health is so precarious that we might not have full control over it. This moralization of health is known as healthism. While it promotes self-empowerment for individual health, it also stigmatizes those who don't keep up, rather than recognizing the limited education, resources, and opportunities that can prevent some from reaching healthiness. With this in mind, health isn't equally distributed. Those with more money and educational opportunities growing up and in adulthood have greater and easier access to it. We would do better to assume that our perceived lack of health in someone is due to societal inequities, but even this is problematic when levied at the first sight of someone. We fear gaining weight not because of any real immediate threat to our health, but because of how we'll be perceived.
If you keep eating those cookies, you won't be a medium much longer anyway. Haha.
Aubrey Gordon, in her book, What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat, writes this in response to the presidential Let's Move campaign of the early 2010s. It wasn't a campaign against corporate campaigns for cheaply produced foods with little nutritional value, nor against the unchecked poverty that called for such low-cost, shelf-stable foods. It was a campaign against a body type, and more than that, a child's body type. She also quotes fat activist Leslie Kinzel's thoughts on the campaign. Call it a campaign against childhood couch sitting, call it a drive to get kids to go outside and play. Call it a movement to educate children on basic nutrition and how their amazing growing bodies work for them. But don't single out fat kids. It was movements such as these that contributed to the attack on obese bodies, as seen here in these 2012 Georgia billboards. As Gordon writes of this campaign, rather than initiating parent trainings, advocating for increased funding for school nutritional education, changing the contents of school lunches, or alleviating the poverty that relegated so many low-income students to highly processed, low-nutrient foods, they opted to rent billboards. The conclusion some will believe I'm drawing is that people should eat whatever they want, health doesn't matter, and losing weight is immoral. In fact, only one of those conclusions is true. Health is important, both at the individual and societal level, and losing weight, just like gaining weight, isn't immoral. What is immoral and what does need to change is our association of fat and a lack of health. Fat people can be healthy, and thin people can be unhealthy. The idea that certain groups of people are healthier than others sidesteps the point of health. Would we consider someone with a mental illness unhealthy? What about a disabled person?
But to get back to that anecdote about her being harassed on the airplane.
Yeah.
So the guy comes up to her at the end of this flight and says, just so you know, I wouldn't have done this if you used a walker. And I think that that's a really clear example of fat phobia stepping in and taking the part of a less socially acceptable form of hate, which would be disableism.
Even if we can one day edit our genes and end obesity, what does this mean for people who don't have access to this technology? And what if fat people still persist? Do they become some sort of subhuman group undeserving of the respect we owe our fellow humans? GLP-1s are a good thing. They're helping people with diabetes prevent future health complications. They're helping lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. But are losing and gaining weight really health? Or should we instead focus on providing ways for people to eat more nutritious, wholesome foods and to move their bodies more in ways that bring them joy? If individuals want to use GLP-1s primarily to lose weight, that's fine. We live in a society that idolizes thinness. We also live in a society that demands people make money to eat. We shouldn't criticize individuals for that. But to look at the technological progress of GLP-1s and think, wow, we might see an end to obesity, is wrong. It's a thinly veiled step away from, wow, we might see an end to fat people. The human body comes in many shapes, sizes, and colors, to speak only of its visual variations. But all bodies are connected by their humanness, an attribute that demands respect. Aubrey Gordon recounts throughout her book the many experiences she's had with thin people's responses to her body. Many have approached her with disgust, disrespect, and dehumanization. Even close friends tell her how brave she is for going out in public, reflecting a fear of their own bodies becoming fat. Health is not gaining or losing weight. It's barely related to lowering your blood sugar or reducing the risk of stroke. These latter two are aspects of health, but health is more than that. Health is the ability to live. It's about access to nutritious foods that fuel our bodies, enabling us to think, act, and move in ways that bring us joy. Health is also about dignity. If we talk about GLP-1s as an end to obesity, we're leaving fat people out of a say about health. Instead of talking about an end to obesity, we should heed the words of Aubrey Gordon. What if, for once, we spoke with fat people instead of about fat people?
Thank you so much.
All right, quick trot time. We have a playlist linked in the description. Make sure you check that out. It's got some good videos on the topic we were just discussing. Don't forget to check out Aubrey Gordon's book, What We Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. I've also got my sources linked in the description. I also have 2 new podcasts out. We Love in a Society, which you heard earlier, where my girlfriend and I discuss sociologically minded concepts in books and movies and TV. And also Capital, where I'm going to attempt to go through this book. We'll see if I ever end up getting through it. And last but not least, make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to help support me. And yeah, see you next time.